Hi, my name is Corey Lancaster, Community Education Specialist at Legal Aid of Arkansas, and today I'm going to talk about the Fair Housing Act's protected classes and prohibited conduct, or in other words, who the Fair Housing Act protects and what it prohibits. The Fair Housing Act was passed by Congress in 1968 as one of the most important pieces of legislation in the Civil Rights era.
Originally, the Fair Housing Act protected people from discrimination based on race, color, national origin, and religion. Sex, disability, and familial status protections have been added over the course of the Act's history.
Some of the protected classes are pretty straightforward. Some, however, can be a little more complicated.
Race discrimination occurs when someone is treated unfavorably because of their race or personal characteristics associated with their race, while color discrimination involves treating someone unfavorably because of skin color or complexion. Discrimination based on national origin is unfavorable treatment of someone because of their place of origin or ancestry, or because the person has physical, cultural, or linguistic characteristics of a specific group, whether the person is part of the group or not. People can suffer from religious discrimination when treated unfairly because of religious observances, practices, or beliefs, though there are some limits to this protection. There is no duty to provide for a reasonable accommodation for religion. Sex discrimination occurs when there is different treatment because of gender, and this includes sexual harassment. Sexual harassment can either be conditioned access to or retention of housing based on sexual contact with the provider, employee, or agent, what's referred to as quid pro quo, or the creation of a hostile environment based on actions created by the provider, employee, or agent, or even, in some instances, other tenants.
Sexual orientation is also protected in HUD-assisted housing and FHA loans. The protections in the Fair Housing Act also work with other federal and state legislation to provide protections for survivors of domestic violence.
Familial status discrimination happens when someone is treated unfavorably because they have children, are pregnant, or are trying to adopt. Such discrimination may be in the form of occupancy standards or segregation based on families with or without children. Disability discrimination involves unfavorable treatment because of someone's physical or mental disability.
So now that we know who the Fair Housing Act protects, what does the Fair Housing Act prohibit? Well, there are two types of discrimination: discriminatory treatment and disparate impact. Generally, when someone thinks of discrimination, they think of overt discriminatory treatment, such as a landlord specifically not renting to racial minorities. Disparate impact, though, is when a facially neutral rule has the effect of discrimination against a protected group. An example of this would be a rental policy that bans felons from applying. While facially neutral, because this policy would, in effect, discriminate against some minority renters, the policy would create a disparate impact.
The Fair Housing Act prohibits discriminatory statements, limitations, or preferences. Examples of this could be ads that say whites only, restrictive covenants and deeds against race or religion, or statements such as we will not rent to black families. Providers cannot discriminate using different terms, conditions, services, or facilities.
Higher down payments or prices for a protected class, different terms that are harder to meet for a protected class, denying facilities for protected class members, or providing special discounts to one class of people but not to another all violate the Fair Housing Act.
Another way a provider can run afoul of the Fair Housing Act is to deny availability. Fair housing testers can often find these issues occurring from different providers.
For example, when a Muslim couple is told a particular unit is sold, but the unit is not sold until several weeks later, and it was available when they inquired, the provider violates the Fair Housing Act. Agents can violate the Fair Housing Act if they are engaged in blockbusting. This is when an agent attempts to persuade homeowners to let the agent sell their houses because a protected class is moving into the neighborhood and the property values will decrease because of it. Similarly, an agent cannot place leaflets around a neighborhood saying that a specific protected class is moving into the neighborhood to try to scare people into selling their houses.
Providers cannot refuse to rent, sell, or otherwise make unavailable their dwellings to people with disabilities.
Examples of this could be the refusal to sell a house to an individual with AIDS, or refusal to negotiate a price because the person is mobility impaired. They also may not differentiate terms, conditions, services, or facilities based on a person's disability, which means a provider may find themselves in violation of the Fair Housing Act if they deny access to a swimming pool to a person who is mobility impaired because the person is impaired.
Fair lending is also a requirement of the Fair Housing Act. Lenders must not impose higher interest rates because of a protected class's status, and they are prohibited from not making loans to minority households because the homes in the neighborhood are majority white.
They also may not take an unreasonable amount of time to process a loan for members of a protected class.
Fair lending also prohibits the historic practice of redlining, which is the refusal to make loans within an area regardless of the qualification for the loan, and reverse redlining, which is offering loans that the lender is aware the borrowers will be unable to repay, with poor terms and conditions attached. Threats, intimidation, and coercion are also prohibited.
Vandalism or violence done to a person's property based on their membership in a protected class are prohibited and can lead to liability. Similarly, an employer may not retaliate against an agent who will not discriminate against prospective home seekers because of class membership.
If you believe you have been a victim of a violation of the Fair Housing Act, call the Legal Aid of Arkansas helpline at 1-800-952-9243.